When I finally saw her again, she was sitting on a faded porch in Alabama, peeling an apple with a pocket knife, like she hadn't. Stolen 22 years of my life. She looked smaller than I remembered. Her hands shook when she saw me, but she didn't drop the knife. She just said, "I knew you'd come someday." That was the first time I saw my mother after I found out the truth. That the woman who gave me life had sold my baby, then vanished before I could even hold her. My name is Leah, and I used to believe I came from an ordinary family. A little broken maybe, but ordinary. I was 31 when everything I knew about love, motherhood, and forgiveness began to unravel. Back then, my world was small but safe. A rented apartment on the edge of a sleepy town in North Carolina, a job at the public library, and a small circle of friends who called me Steady Leah. I liked that word, steady. It sounded like peace. Every morning, I'd walk to work with a cup of instant coffee in a paper cup, nod at the old man who sold newspapers by the corner, and listen to the hum of buses starting their routes. The rhythm of life felt predictable, which, for someone like me, was a gift. I'd spent years trying to build that kind of quiet, the kind where you could breathe without waiting for something to go wrong. My mother, Irene, and I hadn't spoken in almost a decade. Our last conversation had ended with her saying, "You'll understand when you have children of your own." At the time, I thought she meant discipline or sacrifice, the typical things mothers say when you argue. I didn't know she meant betrayal. Before all of this, before the truth came crashing down, I thought the worst thing my mother ever did was leave my father when I was 7. He'd been a gentleman, quiet, always smelling faintly of sawdust and cigarettes. When he died suddenly in a car accident, my mother cried for exactly 3 days. Then she packed our things, sold the house, and said we needed a fresh start. We moved constantly after that, South Carolina, then Tennessee, then Georgia. Each new place was a clean slate for her, but for me, it was just another reminder that home wasn't something we'd ever find. By the time I turned 16, she'd remarried once, divorced twice, and spent most nights drinking cheap gin on the back porch. I learned early how to take care of myself, so when I got pregnant at 19, I didn't expect her to be happy, but I didn't expect her to be cruel either. It was a late summer afternoon when I told her. I can still see the way sunlight hit the kitchen counter, the glass of melted ice beside her elbow, the faint buzz of a fly near the window. I said, "Mama, I'm pregnant." She didn't look up. She just stirred her drink and said, "Whose?" When I told her about Marcus, the boy I'd been seeing for 6 months, she snorted. "You think he's going to stick around? You're a fool, Leah, just like I was." I remember standing there, one hand on my belly, feeling like I'd just confessed something holy and been mocked for it. She said she'd take care of it. I didn't know what that meant until much later. When the contractions came early, I was alone. She wasn't there. She said she was handling paperwork, whatever that meant. The nurses kept asking if I wanted someone in the room, and I kept saying no. It was my first child, my only child, and the pain felt like punishment for something I didn't understand. When I woke up after the epidural wore off, my arms were empty. I remember the nurse's voice, soft but uncertain. "The baby's gone with your mother, sweetheart." She signed the release. I thought she meant my mother had taken the baby home while I recovered. I smiled weakly, grateful that at least my daughter was safe. But when I asked where they were, my mother, my baby, no one would answer. The hospital said the discharge was legitimate. The paperwork had her name on it. I called her number, disconnected. I called Marcus, no answer. 3 days later, I left the hospital with an empty car seat and a silence that rang louder than any scream I could make. Years passed. I tried to rebuild, tried to forget. I moved north, finished school, started working at the library, but birthdays were the hardest. Every September, I'd bake a small cupcake, a ritual. I told no one about, and whisper a name. I never got to officially give her grace. I didn't know where she was, who she was, or if she was even alive. The adoption records were sealed. My mother's trail vanished after 2003, until one night, 22 years later, when an envelope showed up in my mailbox. No return address, just my name in shaky handwriting. Inside was a photograph. A girl, no, a young woman, smiling on what looked like a college campus. She had my eyes, my dimples, my father's crooked nose. On the back of the photo, in faded blue ink, were the words, "She's looking for you." My hands went cold. I sat at the kitchen table staring at that picture until the sun came up. Every nerve in my body screamed one question: how? How had my mother found my baby? And what had she done all those years? That photo became my obsession. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. Every moment at work, I saw that girl's face. I started searching online, matching the photo to universities, alumni groups, anything that looked familiar. And that's when I found it, a name on a student volunteer site. Grace Carter, the same city my mother once mentioned wanting to move to, Montgomery, Alabama. It couldn't be a coincidence. 2 weeks later, I packed a suitcase, took unpaid leave from work, and drove south. The closer I got to Montgomery, the heavier the air felt. The roads blurred. Every mile felt like driving backward through time, past every lie, every silence, every ache. When I reached the address listed on the volunteer page, it wasn't Grace's home. It was a care facility. And when I asked for Irene Carter, they said she'd been a resident there once, under a different name. My mother had changed her identity. That's how I found myself weeks later, standing on a stranger's porch, staring at the woman who had vanished with my baby 22 years earlier. She didn't flinch when I said, "You sold her, didn't you?" Her knife paused midair. Then she looked me dead in the eyes and whispered, "You don't understand, Leah. I saved her." I didn't answer her at first. I just stood there, staring at her as the sound of cicadas filled the air between us. That word, saved, rolled around in my head like something sour. "Saved her?" I said finally. "You took her from me." Mama set the knife down on the railing and leaned back in her chair. The wood creaked beneath her. She looked tired. Not the kind of tired that comes from a long day, but the kind that seeps into your bones and stays there. "I know what you think," she murmured. "But you don't know everything." I almost laughed. "You forged my signature. You took my baby from a hospital crib. What else is there to know?" She sighed, her gaze drifting toward the trees beyond the yard. "Come inside, Leah. I can't say it out here." Her house was small, the kind that smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and loneliness. There were family photos on the walls, but not of us. Pictures of strangers, mostly children, some framed, some tucked behind religious verses written in cursive font. I followed her into the kitchen, the same kind of space she'd always had, neat but cold, like a stage set instead of a home. She poured me a glass of water without asking, like she still knew my habits. I didn't touch it. "Start talking," I said. Mama took a deep breath. "After your father died, I made a lot of mistakes. You know that. I couldn't keep a job, couldn't pay rent half the time. When you got pregnant, I was scared. You didn't have a plan, Leah. That boy was gone. I thought, if I didn't do something, you'd end up like me." "So you sold my baby?" "I found a family," she said quickly. "A proper one. They couldn't have children. They had money. I thought I was giving her a chance." I felt my throat close up. "A chance? You never told me. You never asked. You just—" I had to stop. My voice broke. "You took away the only thing that ever belonged to me." She looked down. "I didn't get paid, not the way you think." I almost believed her. Almost. Until she said, "There was money, yes, but it wasn't about that." And that's when the old rage came back. "You always said that," I whispered. "Every bad thing you ever did, you had a reason. But it's always the same story. You needed it more. You meant well, you were trying to protect me." "From what, Mama? From love?" Her lip trembled. "From yourself." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The clock ticked in the corner. Somewhere outside, a truck backfired. I thought of the years I'd spent wondering if my daughter was alive. The empty birthdays, the quiet prayers. And this woman, my mother, had been sitting in this house, surrounded by pictures of other people's children. I looked closer at one photo on the fridge, a girl about 20, holding a volunteer badge with the name Grace Carter. "Where did you get this?" I asked. Her voice faltered. "She sent it." My breath caught. "She knows you?" "She found me first," Mama whispered. "Last year." That felt like a slap. I stumbled back, gripping the counter to steady myself. "You've seen her?" She nodded. "For how long?" "Since she turned 21. She was curious like you. She wanted to know where she came from. I told her what I could." "You told her what you could?" I echoed. You mean you lied? I told her you were too young, that you wanted a better life for her. I couldn't breathe. I felt my heart pounding in my ears, every word slicing through me like glass. You made me the villain, I said. You made my daughter think I abandoned her. Mama's eyes were wet now. I thought I was doing what was right. She had a good life, Leah. College, opportunities, things you never had. Would you rather she'd grown up watching me drink myself to sleep? I would rather she'd known the truth, I whispered. I needed air. I walked out to the porch, my legs trembling. The sky had darkened. Rain clouds were rolling in. She followed me out, standing in the doorway. She's a good girl, she said softly. You'd be proud. You don't get to say that. She wanted to meet you. I turned to her. Then why didn't she? Mama hesitated. She was scared. She thought you might hate her. She asked me to wait, to give her time. Time for what? For me to tell you first. The irony of that, my mother deciding once again what truths I deserved almost made me laugh. How noble of you, I said bitterly. Still controlling my life after all these years. That night, I sat in my motel room staring at Grace's photo again. The girl who was mine, yet not mine. My mother's words echoed in my head. She found me first. The betrayal was bigger than I could wrap my heart around. It wasn't just the past anymore. It was happening again, right under my nose. I needed to find Grace myself. The next morning, I went back to the volunteer site where I'd first seen her name. There was a contact form for the nonprofit where she worked, something about literacy programs for foster kids. I sent a message, pretending to be a potential donor. Within hours, I got a reply. The signature at the bottom read, Grace C., Program Coordinator. Coordinator, not volunteer. She'd made something of herself. But all I could think was, she didn't know me. Not really. Over the next few days, I pieced together what I could. Her Instagram was public, full of bright smiles, campus events, pictures with friends. One in particular made me pause, a photo of her at a cafe, arm around a woman. My mother. The caption read, Lunch with Grandma Irene. My stomach twisted. Grandma. That word, the one my mother never earned, was the final crack. I closed my laptop and drove. I didn't know exactly where I was going until I got there. The same cafe from the photo, 10 miles outside Montgomery. When I stepped inside, I saw her immediately. Grace, sitting by the window, coffee in hand, sunlight catching the gold in her hair. My hair. She looked up as I approached. Her eyes, my eyes, widened. She whispered, You're Leah. For a moment, I couldn't move. It was like staring into a mirror that showed another lifetime. One I never got to live. Grace stood slowly, clutching her coffee cup like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. Her voice trembled when she said, I thought you'd never come. How do you know who I am? I managed to ask, my throat dry. She smiled faintly, but her eyes were shining with tears. Grandma showed me a picture. An old one. You at 18, holding me in the hospital. My chest tightened. I hadn't even known she had that photo. Why didn't you reach out? I asked. Why didn't you tell me you knew? Her hands trembled. I wanted to. I swear I did. But she said, You didn't want to see me. The air in that cafe seemed to shift. I could feel people around us, the hum of conversations, the clatter of plates, but all I heard was the roaring in my ears. She told you that? I whispered. Grace nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. She said you were angry, that you'd moved on. She said if I showed up, it might ruin your life. I let out a shaky breath and sat down. Ruin my life? I said softly. Grace, my life has been nothing but waiting for you. Her face crumpled. Then why would she lie? Because that's what she does, I thought. Because control is her language and guilt is how she breathes. But I couldn't say that, not yet. We talked for hours, or maybe minutes. I lost track. Grace told me about her childhood, the home in Atlanta, the adoptive parents who adored her but divorced when she was 12. The foster years after that, the scholarship, the sense of never fully belonging anywhere. She found me through a church program, Grace said. She said she'd known me since I was born, that she helped. Arrange things. Arrange! My stomach twisted at the word. She said you were young, scared, that you wanted me to have a better chance. My mother's version again, polished, pitiful, and completely untrue. I didn't give you up, I said quietly. She took you, without my consent. Grace blinked. She said you signed. She forged it. The disbelief in her eyes hurt worse than anything. Not because she didn't believe me, but because I could see her world breaking, the one she'd built around the only family she'd known. She looked down at her hands. She always told me she wished she could have raised me herself. That you were the one who left. She's been rewriting the same story her whole life, I said. A silence fell between us, the kind that carries too much truth. Then Grace whispered, "She told me you were dead." My breath caught. "What?" "She said you'd passed away when I was 10. That's why I didn't look for you sooner. She showed me an obituary with your name." I felt my pulse spike. "An obituary?" Grace nodded. "From a local paper. I even went to a grave once. It had your name on it, Leah Thompson. 1980-2008. I stared at her, my mind reeling. "I'd changed my last name when I married. How did she—" "She must have made it herself," I muttered. "Probably printed it. That's how far she went." Grace's lips quivered. "Why would she do that?" "Because she can't stand not being the savior," I said. "If I'm dead, she gets to be the one who stepped in, who saved you." Grace pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. "I don't know what to believe." "Believe what you feel," I told her softly. "Look at me. I'm not a ghost. I never left you. I've been looking for you my whole life." Her tears fell freely then, and for the first time in decades, I let mine fall too. We sat there crying quietly, strangers and yet not. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. For so long I'd wanted to hate my mother, but now, sitting across from the daughter she'd stolen, I realized hate wasn't enough. What she did wasn't just cruelty. It was obsession. She wanted ownership of love. That night, I stayed awake replaying everything Grace had said. The obituary, the stories, the lies. I thought about how Mama must have sat in her kitchen, crafting this false world piece by piece, until she could believe it herself. The next morning, I drove back to her house. She was sitting on the porch again, like she'd been waiting. "I saw her," I said. Mama didn't look surprised. "I figured you would. You told her I was dead." She flinched. I thought it would make it easier. "For who?" I snapped. "You or her?" She needed stability, Leah. She needed a story she could live with. I gave her that. My hands were shaking. "You took my child, lied to her face, and buried me on paper. And you call that love?" Mama's voice broke. "You think it was easy? You think I slept at night knowing what I did? Then why didn't you fix it?" I demanded. "You had years, decades." Her eyes filled with something between guilt and defiance. "Because by the time she found me, it was too late. She loved me. She called me Grandma. If I told her the truth, she'd have hated me. And I couldn't bear that." The honesty in her voice stunned me. Not because it made sense, but because it showed the rot at her core. She hadn't done it for Grace or even for me. She'd done it because she couldn't stand losing control of the story. "I don't know how to forgive you," I said. She looked down. "You don't have to. I just need you to understand." But understanding was no longer enough. "I'm going to tell her everything," I said. Her head snapped up. "No, please, Leah. She deserves the truth. If she hates me, I'll die," she whispered. "Then maybe that's justice," I said quietly. And I left her standing there, her figure shrinking in the rearview mirror as I drove away. Toward something uncertain but honest. "Ah!" That night Grace called me. "Grandma came to my apartment," she said softly. She was crying. She said, "You're trying to turn me against her." I swallowed. "I'm not turning you against anyone. I'm telling you the truth." "I know," she whispered. "I can see it now. The way she talks. It's like she's still trying to convince herself." There was a pause. "Can we meet again, just us?" "Yes," I said. As I hung up, I looked out the motel window at the dark Alabama sky. Somewhere beneath it, the child I'd lost had grown into a woman brave, enough to face the same storm that once swallowed me. This time I wouldn't let her face it alone. The next morning, I met Grace again. This time, not at a cafe, but at a quiet park near the river. The same river I used to sit by as a teenager, when Mama's voice was too loud in my head and the world felt too small for me to breathe. It was early. The air still smelled of dew and wet grass. Grace wore a pale yellow sweater, her hair pulled into a messy bun, no makeup. She looked younger that way, not because of her face, but because of the tenderness in her expression. She sat on a bench, twisting a paper coffee cup in her hands. I couldn't sleep last night, she said. I kept thinking about everything you told me. I couldn't either, I admitted, sitting beside her. It feels like I've been waiting years for this moment. But now that it's here, I looked at her, searching her eyes. I'm scared. Grace nodded. Me too. The river shimmered in the morning light. Somewhere behind us, a dog barked, and a child laughed. Life was going on, ordinary, indifferent, while our world was unraveling quietly in its corner. She's not going to tell the truth, I said. Not unless she's forced to. I know. Grace turned to me. Then let's make her. Her voice was soft but steady, the kind of tone that carries resolve, not rage. We drove together to Mama's house later that afternoon. I could feel the air thicken with every mile. The closer we got, the quieter Grace became. When we pulled up, Mama was on the porch again. Only this time she didn't wave. She just sat there, hands folded, eyes hollow. Grace stepped out of the car first. I followed. Mama, I said, my voice even. We need to talk. Her eyes darted between us, me, then Grace. She looked like a woman standing at the edge of a cliff. She'd built herself. Come inside, she said quietly. The house smelled like it always did. Lavender cleaner, old wood, and something faintly burnt from the kitchen. Everything looked the same, yet it felt alien, as if the walls were holding their breath. We sat at the dining table, the same one where she used to make me recite prayers before meals, where she'd cut my sandwiches into perfect triangles when I was a child. Grace spoke first. Grandma, she said, her voice trembling slightly. I need you to tell me the truth. Mama's lips pressed together. I already told you. No, Grace interrupted softly. Not your version. The real one. For a long time there was only silence. The kind that stretches so far you can hear your own heartbeat. Then Mama looked at me. You told her, didn't you? I told her what happened, I said. Because she deserved to know. Mama's voice cracked. You don't understand what it was like. You were 17, Leah. You had no money, no job, no plan. You were reckless. I couldn't let that child suffer because of your mistakes. She was my child, I said, my voice low but sharp. And my blood, she fired back. I did what I had to do to protect her, to protect both of you. By stealing her from me? She would have ended up in foster care. She did, Grace whispered, her eyes filling with tears. Mama froze. Grace continued, her voice trembling. After the couple you arranged it with divorced, I was in foster homes for years. You didn't save me. You abandoned both of us. Mama's eyes glistened, her breath coming fast. No, that's not true. I was 12 when they split, Grace said. I used to pray every night that someone would come for me. You never did. Mama pressed a hand to her mouth, shaking her head. I didn't know. They told you what you wanted to hear, I said. So you could sleep at night. She slumped in her chair. The weight of the truth seemed to crush her shoulders. The three of us sat in that kitchen, 3 women connected by blood, broken by silence. I looked at Grace. You can decide what happens next, I told her. If you want to walk away, I'll support that. If you want answers, I'll help you get them. But you deserve to choose for yourself now. Grace's chin trembled. I want her to admit it. Mama lifted her head slowly. Admit what? That you sold me? Grace said. The words hung heavy in the air, almost too heavy to breathe through. Mama's face crumpled. I didn't sell you, You took money, I said firmly. I found the bank records. $10,000, cash deposit, 2 weeks after Grace was born. Don't tell me it was for groceries. Mama's mouth opened, then closed again. Tears began to spill down her cheeks. It wasn't about the money, she whispered. I thought, if I gave you to people who could give you a better life, it would erase the shame, the whispers, the judgment. Grace's voice shook. You were ashamed of me? No, Mama said quickly, reaching out. Never of you. Of her, she glanced at me. Of what people thought of her. A teenage mother, no father in sight, no future. I stood. So you punished me for your reputation? She looked up, eyes wild with guilt. I thought I was saving you from yourself. You weren't saving anyone, I said quietly. You were hiding your sin behind my grief. The room went still. The only sound was the ticking of the kitchen clock, a slow, steady metronome of everything lost. Grace stood suddenly. I can't do this, she whispered, and walked out the door. I hesitated, then followed her. Outside, she was standing by the car, arms wrapped around herself. Her shoulders shook. "I thought I was ready to hear it," she said. But hearing her say it, "It's like losing both of you at once." I stepped closer, careful not to crowd her. "You didn't lose me," I said. "You found me." She turned toward me then, her eyes full of sorrow and something else. Understanding. "She'll never change, will she?" I shook my head. "Probably not." "Then maybe we don't need her to," Grace said quietly. That simple sentence, fragile yet certain, felt like a door opening. We stood there in silence, two women born from the same wound, finally facing the light. Inside the house, I could see Mama through the window, sitting alone at the table, her head bowed. For the first time, I didn't feel rage or pity, just distance, like a story that had reached its ending. Grace reached for my hand. "Let's go," she said. So we did. As the car pulled away, I didn't look back. Some truths don't need witnesses, only freedom. The next few days passed like a fog. Grace went back to Atlanta to clear her head, and I stayed in that small Alabama town a little longer. Part of me still tangled in the roots. I'd once tried to cut free from. I thought about leaving quietly, but the truth has a way of echoing, even when you try to soften it. It started with a visit from Pastor David, the man who'd known my mother since I was a child. I found him waiting by his truck outside the motel one morning, holding his hat in his hands. "Your mama came by the church yesterday," he said. I braced myself. "Did she tell you what happened?" "She told me you came back, that you were angry." His eyes softened, but she didn't tell me why. I looked down at my coffee, the steam curling between us. "She sold my baby, Pastor. She forged papers and took money to make it happen." His face paled. He took off his hat and pressed it to his chest. "Lord have mercy." He shook his head slowly. I knew she'd carried a heavy burden, but I never imagined. "She called it protecting me," I said. "But what she really did was protect her pride." Pastor David sighed deeply. "People here always thought she was so strong, but I think that strength came from fear. Fear of being seen as weak or wrong. And fear, child, can make even good folks do evil things." He looked at me, his eyes kind but tired. "What do you want to do now?" "I want to tell the truth," I said. "Not to shame her, just so nobody else carries her lies for her." He nodded. "Then tell it. This town listens when you speak quietly." By Sunday, whispers had already begun. Small towns have a way of piecing stories together faster than the people living them. I didn't plan to make it public. But Grace called me that afternoon and said something that changed everything. "She's been messaging me nonstop," Grace said, her voice tight. "Telling me you're lying, that you made this all up because you're jealous of her and me." My stomach turned. She's still trying to control the story. She even told my adoptive mom's family that I'm being manipulated, that I should stay away from you. I sat in silence for a moment, then said, "Then maybe it's time everyone hears the truth. From both of us." Grace hesitated. "You mean, go public?" "Not to humiliate her," I said, "but to set the record straight. If she insists on rewriting our story, we'll publish the original." Grace was quiet for a long time. Then she said softly, "Okay, let's do it." 2 days later, Grace posted a video. Not a flashy one, just her sitting on her couch, holding a photo of herself as a baby. She spoke clearly, with the same calm tone she'd used that morning by the river. She said she'd been adopted under suspicious circumstances, that she'd recently met her birth mother, and the story she'd been told for years turned out to be a lie. She didn't name my mother directly, but the people in town knew. The comments filled with prayers, shock, heartbreak, and the usual mix of judgment and pity. Within hours, someone recognized Mama in the story. By evening, she called me. Her voice was trembling, not with anger this time, but with fear. "You've destroyed me," she said. "No, Mama," I said quietly. "You did that yourself. I just stopped covering for you. You think this makes you noble? Do you have any idea what people are saying about me? I don't care what they say. I care that Grace finally has the truth." Her breathing was ragged. "You're my daughter. You were supposed to protect me. I protected you for 35 years, I said. Now I'm protecting her." There was a pause. Then she whispered, almost to herself, "Everyone will hate me." I closed my eyes. Maybe, but maybe now they'll stop pretending to love a lie. And I hung up, Over the next week, the phone calls stopped. No one from the church came to visit her. Even the ladies from her Bible study group, the ones who used to fawn over her garden and her Sunday casseroles, went silent. When I finally drove by the house one last time, the curtains were drawn and the porch plants were wilting. I didn't knock. I couldn't. Instead, I left an envelope on the step. Inside was a letter, handwritten plain. It said, "You took my child. You built a story that broke 3 lives. I can't forgive that, not yet. But I'm done letting it define me. I'm setting the truth free, not to punish you, but to finally breathe. I hope one day you find peace and honesty, the way I finally did." I walked away before I could change my mind. A few days later, Pastor David called again. "Your mama didn't come to church," he said quietly. "She's keeping to herself." I nodded, though he couldn't see it. "She said she's been praying. Maybe she's finally seeing herself clearly." "Maybe," I said. There was a long pause before he added, "You did right, Leah. Sometimes truth sounds cruel at first, but it's the only way to clean a wound." I thanked him and hung up. For the first time in years, I slept without dreams. The next morning, I opened my phone to a new message from Grace. A photo. It was of her little boy, 3 years old, smiling with a chocolate-smeared face. Underneath, she'd written, "He calls you Grandma Leah now. Hope that's okay." Tears blurred the screen. It was more than okay. It was healing. The first time I heard him say it, Grandma Leah, it was through a phone screen. Grace had called on a lazy Sunday afternoon, sunlight streaming across her couch. Her son, Michael, sat on her lap holding a toy truck, the sound of his giggles spilling through the speaker like music. I didn't know I'd been waiting my whole life to hear. "Say hi to Grandma Leah," she coaxed, brushing a curl from his forehead. He waved, eyes bright and fearless. "Hi, Grandma." Something broke and healed inside me all at once. I pressed my hand to my chest, laughing through tears. "Hi, baby," I whispered. "You don't even know what you just gave me." Grace smiled, her own eyes wet. "He will, one day." That night, after the call ended, I sat by the motel window again. The same place where I'd once rehearsed what I would say to my mother. The rain had returned, tapping softly against the glass. But it didn't sound lonely anymore. It sounded like release. For the first time in decades, I wasn't chasing ghosts. I wasn't trying to rewrite the past. I was simply here, in the quiet, breathing freely. A few weeks later, Grace invited me to Atlanta. "I want you to meet him," she said. "In person this time. He's been asking about you every day." The drive felt shorter than I remembered, though it was still 5 hours. Maybe because I wasn't driving toward pain this time, I was driving toward something whole. When I arrived, Grace met me at the door of a small house with blue shutters and sunflowers lining the walkway. She looked nervous, her hands fidgeting in that familiar way. A habit. I realized she must have gotten from me. "Hi," she said softly. "Hi," I breathed. Then she stepped forward and hugged me. It wasn't the polite kind of hug people give to strangers or to relatives they see once a year. It was a long, trembling, silent one. The kind that says, "I'm sorry and I love you, and we made it all at once." When we finally pulled apart, she laughed through tears. "Come inside. Someone's been waiting for you." Michael came running down the hallway, his little feet slapping against the wooden floor. He carried a coloring book under his arm and stopped shyly at the sight of me. "This is Grandma Leah," Grace said gently. He studied me with the same curious tilt of the head his mother had when she was nervous. Then, without a word, he reached into his coloring book and tore out a page. A drawing of a red house under a bright yellow sun, and handed it to me. "For you," he said. I took it, my voice catching. "It's beautiful." He grinned. "It's our house. That's you in the window." And just like that, I was part of a home again. The 3 of us spent the day together, playing, cooking, talking in half-finished sentences that didn't need to be perfect. Grace told me about her childhood, the parents who'd raised her with kindness, the moments she'd always wondered about, but never voiced aloud. "I used to have this dream," she said, later that night after Michael was asleep. "I'd be standing on a bridge, and there'd be this woman on the other side. I couldn't see her face, but I always woke up crying. I think it was you." I smiled faintly. "I had dreams too. You were always running, laughing but never looking back. And I could never catch up." She reached over and took my hand. You did now. And in that moment, all the bitterness, all the ache, all the questions that had haunted me for years finally quieted. The next morning, I woke up early. Grace was still asleep on the couch. Michael curled up beside her like a tiny echo of peace. I stepped out into the backyard, the grass wet with dew, the air smelling faintly of jasmine and coffee from a neighbor's porch. I sat on the steps and let the sunrise wash over me. It struck me then that healing doesn't always arrive with apologies. Sometimes it comes with the simple act of being allowed to love again. I thought of my mother, of Irene, and wondered what she was doing now. Whether she'd watched Grace's video, whether she'd seen the wave of truth come for her. I didn't hate her anymore. Hate had no room left inside me, only understanding. Not approval, not forgiveness yet, but understanding. She'd been broken too, and she passed that brokenness on like an inheritance. I couldn't change that, but I could choose not to pass it forward. When Grace woke, she found me outside, coffee cup in hand. Thinking about her? She asked. Always, I said. She called, Grace admitted. Yesterday. I looked at her, surprised. What did she say? She just asked if you were okay. I nodded slowly, staring at the horizon. Tell her I am. Grace hesitated. Would you ever want to see her again? I let the question settle between us. The birds chirped softly in the trees. A few cars passed in the distance. Finally, I said, maybe one day. But if I do, it won't be for answers. It'll be for goodbye. Weeks turned into months. I moved to Atlanta eventually. Found a small apartment just a few miles from Grace. We started new traditions. Friday dinners. Saturday playgrounds, Sunday church visits. Michael began calling me Grandma Lee, his way of shortening it. And soon it stuck. Every time he said it, something inside me softened. I started volunteering with Grace's program, reading to foster kids, children who knew too well what it meant to be lost and found. One of the girls, about 12, asked me once, "Do people ever really come back, Miss Leah?" I smiled gently. "Sometimes they don't," I said. "But sometimes when your heart is ready, they find their way." A year later, I got a letter in the mail. No return address, just my name in my mother's handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper. I saw the video. I saw your happiness. I'm glad you found each other. I was wrong, Leah, in ways I didn't even understand. I thought I was saving you. I see now I was only saving myself. If there's any grace left for me in your heart, let it be that you're free now. Irene. I read it 3 times. Then I folded it carefully, placed it in a drawer, and whispered to the empty room, "I forgive you, Mama, I really do." Not because she deserved it, but because I finally did. Sometimes the people who are supposed to love us the most are the ones who teach us the hardest kind of forgiveness. I used to believe my story began and ended with what my mother did to me. That every choice, every loss, every ache in my chest traced back to that single act of betrayal. But standing here now, years later, watching my daughter laugh with her son in the park, I see things differently. It's not the betrayal that defines us. It's what we do after. I thought my mother's decision ruined me. But in a strange, quiet way, it gave me the strength to love deeper, to fight harder for truth, and to stop letting silence be my inheritance. Some nights I still dream about her, not the version I confronted in that apartment, bitter and hollow, but the younger woman, sitting in a kitchen I barely remember, humming while she cooked. In my dreams, she turns and smiles, and I realize she's been trying to speak all along. She just didn't know how. Maybe that's what healing really is, learning to hear the parts of someone's pain that never had words. If you've ever been betrayed by blood, if you've ever searched for someone who should have loved you differently, I hope you remember this. Closure doesn't always come from the apology you're waiting for. Sometimes it comes from the peace you decide to give yourself. I found mine not in revenge, but in reunion. Not in punishment, but in understanding. And in that quiet understanding, I found my family again. Would you have done what I did? Would you have gone back? Not for answers, but for peace. Tell me in the comments. And if you've ever carried a family secret that almost broke you, you're not alone. Thank you for listening to my story. This was My Mother Sold My Baby. I traced her across states. If this story touched your heart, subscribe for more, because somewhere, Someone is still searching for their truth.